Okay, now I'll officially start the class. Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and welcome to another week of community development. And this time will be, this is perhaps, I should say that this is the first of this is a first part of two sessions about understanding society, the mechanisms of society, and for us to discuss the tools that will help us, understand societal structures and such. Um, normally, normally, or actually last year, what I did was I introduced two methods at the same time: stakeholder mapping, which we'll talk about today, and what was the other one? Stakeholder mapping or stakeholder analysis, and the other one is social mapping. But rather than introducing you guys to two separate tools and then only giving you fragments of each, I thought we'll discuss these two separately, and today we'll focus on the stakeholder mapping bit. And I have planned for a brief simulation exercise, so to say. Um, I've distributed the exercise brief through Amira last night, and I've already uploaded it to the classroom for you all to access. And I hope I hope you had a read through it, and then because that's a part of what we're going to do today. I'll split the class into groups, three groups maybe, into breakout rooms. You will all talk about. You will then identify stakeholders. Sorry. Break you into three groups. Break you into three groups. I'll give you a case study, and then you'll discuss that case study and with your groups and try to identify the stakeholders, key stakeholders, and try to map them out and come up with a strategy on how to manage the stakeholders. Which ones should you keep informed? Which ones should you pay more attention to, and so on. But before we do that, let's just talk about the actual tool that we're going to use, or stakeholder analysis or stakeholder mapping. For those of you who've just come in, please scan the QR code, and the QR code will make subsequent appearances throughout the session today. So this is what we will be talking about, because we're focusing on stakeholder analysis or stakeholder mapping. So we'll have a look at what stakeholders are and what their interests are. Last week, I introduced, I gave a brief introduction on the definition of what stakeholders are, and but this week we'll dive in a little bit further, and we'll explore what their interests are, or what their interests may be. And then why do we need to identify and analyze stakeholders? Who are potential stakeholders? How do we identify them? And when should we identify these stakeholders? And how do we identify, and how do we analyze, or how can we try to understand them? Now, the reason that stakeholder analysis is taught in the community development unit is because, well, in general, spatial planning is actually a big fan of participatory processes, and that means involving as many as possible of those who are affected by or have an interest in any project, any initiative, any intervention, or any effort that has something to do with spatial planning. For me personally, I strongly believe that in most cases involving all of these folks or these stakeholders will lead to a better process. And whatever our initiative is, we can gain greater community support and community buy-in, and we can gather more ideas on the table, and we can get a much better understanding of the community context, and ultimately it will help us create, or not create, sorry, it will help us deliver a more effective effort, a more effective program, or a more effective plan. In order to conduct a participatory process and gain all the advantages that I just mentioned, gain the advantages that it brings, you must figure out who the stakeholders are, which of them need to be involved, and which of them need to be involved, and at what level do they need to be involved, or at what level do they engage with the program or with the effort, and what issues they may bring with them. Now, the same is equally true whether you're building support for a new or an ongoing effort. So if it's a mid or long term plan or project, then you might need to continuously update your list of stakeholders and so on. Yeah. So as I said, it's true. It's equally true whether it's a new or an ongoing effort. Even if the process that led up to this stakeholder analysis wasn't strictly a participatory effort, even if it was a top down, more of a top down and authoritarian approach, but somewhere along the way, if you decide, okay, it's time for public participation. So at any point in time during a project or during a program, then stakeholder analysis is crucial. So, what are exactly stakeholders, and what are their interests? In short, as I mentioned last week, stakeholders are those who may be affected by or have an effect on an effort, a program, or an initiative. Stakeholders may also include people who have a strong interest in the effort, or in the program, or in the policy, or in the initiative. They have a strong interest for academic, philosophical, or even political reasons. Even though they themselves and their families, friends, and associates are not directly affected by it. There are three major stakeholder categories, and categorizing them is just one way to characterize stakeholders by their relationship to the effort or to the program in question. The primary stakeholders are the people or the groups that stand to be directly affected. They are directly affected either positively or negatively by an effort or the actions of an agency, an institution, or an organization. In some cases, there are primary stakeholders on both sides of the equation. So a regulation that benefits one group, for example, a regulation or a policy, it benefits group A, may have a negative effect on another group, group B or group C, and so on. Um, a, a rent control policy, for example, may benefit tenants, but may hurt landlords. So may hurt landlords or landowners because they can't they can't increase the rent above a certain threshold, for example. The next category is the secondary stakeholders. These are the people or groups that are indirectly affected, either positively or negatively, by an effort or the actions of an agency, institution, or organization. A program to reduce domestic violence, for example, if you have plans to help victims of domestic violence by introducing a program to reduce domestic violence, for instance, may have positive effect on emergency room personnel by reducing the number of cases they see. It might require more training for the police force, for authorities to help handle domestic violence calls in a different way, maybe. Now, both of these groups, the emergency room operators or medical personnel, emergency room personnel, and the police are both secondary stakeholders in this case. And then we have key stakeholders. Now, key stakeholders might belong to either or neither of the first two groups. Key stakeholders are those who can have a positive or a negative effect on the effort itself or on an effort. Or key stakeholders are those who are important within or important to an organization or to an agency or institution engaged in an effort. For example, the director of an organization may be an obvious key stakeholder, but so might the line staff, those who work directly with participants, who carry out the work of the effort. And if key stakeholders don't believe in what if they don't believe in what they're doing, or if they don't do it well, it might as well have not begun. Or other examples of key stakeholders might be funders or financiers, elected or appointment government officials, heads of business or clergy, and other community figures who wield or who have or carry with them a significant amount of influence, if that makes sense. Now, stakeholder interests vary greatly from one from one from one category to another, or even from individuals. Some stakeholders may have economic interests. They may be interested in a program or an effort or an initiative because they want to see social changes or other changes. They may be interested because it's their work, for example, because it's work related. If there's an education initiative, then I might take interest in it because I work in education, more specifically higher education. They may be interested because of the time frame. They may be interested because of environmental issues or environmental reasons. They may have interest because it has something to do with their physical and or mental health and overall well-being. So physical health, safety and security, and mental health. the list goes on and on actually, but these 8 or 9 8 or 9 category of interests are the most common reasons people take part or take interest in an initiative or a program. So why do we bother actually identifying and analyzing and trying to understand these different groups of people or these different individuals? I guess the most important reason for identifying and understanding stakeholders is that it allows you to recruit them as part of the initiative or as part of the process. In most cases, then that effort or that process is a participatory effort, and it involves representations of as many stakeholders as possible. And other than that general significance, there are several possible and possibly important advantages, such as it puts more ideas on the table than would be the case if the development and the implementation of the effort were confined to, say, a single organization or to a small group of like-minded people. It includes identifying and analyzing stakeholders, then also includes varied perspectives from different sectors and different elements of the community affected by the effort, thus giving a clearer picture of the community context and the potential pitfalls and the potential assets that you may have access to. It gains buy-in and support for the effort from all stakeholders by making them an integral part of the development, planning, implementation, and perhaps even evaluation. So by involving the stakeholders throughout the process, then your ideas, your plans, your efforts, your initiatives, whatever it is that you want to implement on the society, then it is more likely to gain support from them. It then becomes not your effort, but it also becomes their effort, and they'll do their best to make it work, so to say. Involving stakeholders is fair well, basically it's fair to everyone. All stakeholders can have a say in the development of an effort that may seriously affect them. And anticipation, as in it saves you from being blindsided by concerns or risks that you didn't know about or you didn't think about. If everyone has a seat at the table, concerns can be communicated and they can be resolved before they become stumbling blocks, before they become a hindrance, or in more popular terms, penkak bendol muri. That's what we would say. Even if these issues can't be resolved, we're still talking about anticipation. Even if these issues or these stumbling blocks can't be resolved, then they won't come to you as a surprise, and they won't be able to totally derail the effort. It's not gonna. If it comes as a surprise, then if you didn't anticipate something, if you didn't anticipate an issue beforehand, then it could potentially derail the project just when you thought everything was going well. If you could see the, if you could see the, if you could see the obstacle ahead of you, or you're anticipating or you're expecting to see certain obstacles ahead, then you can plan accordingly and take countermeasures, or you can just maneuver away from those obstacles. It strengthens your position, strengthening. If there's opposition, if you have an idea for a program, for a development program, some people will say yay, others will say nay. And if you recruit stakeholders from different layers and from different layers of society, then it may strengthen your position. It may give you more bargaining power by having all the stakeholders on board. It will make a huge difference in terms of political and moral clout. So you'll have a more solid and a more you'll have a more solid and level ground to stand on. It also creates bridging social capital for the community. Social capital is the web of acquaintances, friendships, family ties, favors, obligations, and other social currency that can be used to cement and strengthen relationships and communities. Bridging social capital, which then creates connections among among diverse groups. Diverse groups that otherwise won't interact is perhaps the most valuable kind. So by identifying the stakeholders and by bringing them into the process, then you may actually be contributing to strengthening their social networks, because sometimes if you don't talk about these things, then these different groups of people may not even talk to each other. So that's one way of putting it. Right, bridging, it makes possible for a community without barriers of class or economics, in a stakeholder meeting where people from all walks of life can know and value one another, and this participatory process often includes everyone, from welfare recipients to bank officers and physicians, and they can just create this sort of situation where everyone builds on each other's strengths and weaknesses and characteristics and such. A good stakeholder mapping and good stakeholder management will also increase the credibility of your organization, because it shows how well your organization can engage with the community. Now, involving and attending to all of the concerns, or to the concerns of all the stakeholders, will establish your organization as a fair organization, as an ethical organization, and most importantly, as a transparent organization. And that makes it more likely that others will work with you in other circumstances. And of course, last but not least, it increases the chances for the success of your effort, of your program, of your initiative, of your development plan, or whatnot. For all of the above reasons, identifying stakeholders and responding to their concerns, managing them, makes it far more likely that your effort will both will have both the community support it needs and the appropriate focus to be effective, if that makes sense. Now, I mentioned that there are different there are different stakeholders. So, who are these potential stakeholders? Um, as we discussed, there are primary stakeholders, secondary stakeholders, as well as key stakeholders who may or may not fall into one of the other two groups. Let's examine these. Let's examine possible stakeholders using this framework. And the image is gone. That's fine. Primary stakeholders, or those who are sorry for the missing image, but primary stakeholders, those who are directly affected, can be beneficiaries or targets of the effort. Beneficiaries are those who stand to gain something, services, skills, money, goods, social connections, etc., as a direct result of the effort or of the initiative that you have. Um, Targets are those who may or may not stand to gain personally, or whose actions represent who represents a benefit to a particular, usually disadvantaged population, or to the community as a whole. Some examples are, say, a particular population, a racial or an ethnic group, ethnic minorities, a socio-economic group, residents of a housing project, community housing project, for example, etc. Residents of a particular area, a certain neighborhood, a town, a rural area. It could be people experiencing or people who are at risk of a particular problem or a particular condition, like homelessness, lack of basic skills, unemployment, and physical health or public health issues. Primary stakeholders may include people involved or participants in a particular organization or institutions, such as students at a school, youth groups or youth involved in the justice system, welfare recipients. Primary stakeholders may be people whose behavior the effort aims to change, like delinquent youth or smokers, people who engage in unsafe unsafe activities, people who don't exercise, and so on and so on. So people whose behavior that you would like to change. Primary stakeholders can be policymakers in agencies that are targets for advocacy efforts. Or if you sum it all up, anyone who's directly impacted, both negatively or positively, by the program or effort. Secondary stakeholders. Secondary stakeholders can be split into two subcategories: those directly involved with or responsible for beneficiaries or targets of an effort, and those whose jobs or lives may be affected. Those directly involved with or responsible for beneficiaries or targets of the effort might include individuals and organizations that live with, are close to, or care for the people in question, and those that offer services directly to them. Now, among these subcategories, or in this particular subcategory, you might find parents, spouses, siblings, children, other family members, significant others, friends, schools and their employees like teachers, counselors, teacher aides, etc., doctors and other medical professionals, particularly primary care providers, social workers and psychotherapists, health and human service organizations and their line staff, like youth workers, welfare case workers, etc. Community volunteers in various capacities, from drivers to volunteer instructors in training programs, to those who staff food pantries and soup kitchens, if there are any of such things here. And in the other category, or in the other subcategory, those whose jobs or lives might be affected by the process or results of the effort. Some of these individuals and groups overlap with the previous. Okay, overlap with the previous category. Police or other law or regulation enforcement agencies. For example, I mentioned domestic violence earlier. New approaches to violence prevention, perhaps dealing with drug abuse or domestic violence or other similar phenomena or issues, may require changes in training and require changes or training in and the practice of new skills on the part of the members of these agencies. Emergency room personnel, teachers, and others who are legally bound to report possible, well, if we're talking about domestic violence, then emergency room personnel, teachers, and others who are legally bound to report possible child abuse and neglect or other similar situations. Landlords have legal rights and responsibilities that may be altered by laws brought up by campaigns to stop discrimination in housing, or to strengthen tenants' rights. Contractors and developers may be affected by open space laws, zoning regulations, and other requirements, as well as incentives, and that may affect how, where, and what contractors and developers choose to build. Employers, if you introduce a workplace safety initiative, or if you or strengthen workplace safety regulations, then it may require changes to their health insurance schemes, so changes their health insurance requirements, and other mandates may also affect employers' costs. Those that hire and make a commitment to workers from at-risk populations may also have to institute workers assistance programs, like personal counseling, for example, as well as provide basic skills and other training. Ordinary community members, or the general community, whose lives, jobs, or routines might be affected by an effort or policy change in policy, such as the location of a homeless shelter in the neighborhood or changes in zoning regulations. So there are a lot of stakeholders, and depending on what program or what initiative you have in mind to introduce to the community or to introduce to society, then primary, secondary stakeholders may or subjects may change. And then finally, we have the key stakeholders, which consist of government officials and policymakers, influencers, or those who can influence others, and anyone interested in the outcome of an effort. Government officials and policymakers, these are the people who can devise, pass, and enforce laws and regulations that may either fulfill the goals of your effort or directly cancel them out. So they can be with you or they can be totally against you. Not the government per se, but their attitude and their position and their regulations and policies and their decisions may be maybe helping you fulfill your project goals, or they could blindside you and directly cancel out your goals. Legislators, federal and state or provincial representatives, senators, members of parliament, etc., who introduce and pass, legalize laws and generally control public budgeting at the federal, state, provincial, or even down at the local levels. Governors, mayors, city or town councillors, etc. Or even any other executive that that carries out laws, administer budgets, and generally run the show, can contribute greatly to the success or failure of an effort. Other examples of government officials and policymakers are local board members, boards of health, boards of planning, boards. Maybe there's a zoning board. I don't really know the equivalent in our planning system or culture. But anyone who through their power to issue permits and regulations, they can be crucial allies. But on the other hand, they can also be very or extremely dangerous opponents. State, federal agencies, government agencies often devise and issue regulations and reporting requirements, and they can sometimes make or break an effort by how they choose to regulate and how vigorously they enforce their regulations. Policymakers in general, who often have no official power, they may be advisors to those with real power, with real authority, but their opinions and ideas are often followed very closely. If you get policymakers on your side, if these guys are on your side, that's a big plus. Other key stakeholders, influencers, or anyone or those who can influence others, like the media, for example. The media can turn our heads one way and another. So the media is one key or one major stakeholder, one major key stakeholder. Or another group of people, or another example of influencers are like people or anyone that can convey influence. Clergy members, doctors, CEOs, college presidents or student representatives, student executives, badan eksekutif mahasiswa, for example. They're all examples of people in this group, people in positions that can convey influence. Community leaders are also influencers, because community leaders are people that other people listen to, people that others listen to. These might be people who are respected because of their position of leadership in a particular population. They may be long-time or lifelong residents who have earned their community's trust over years of integrity and community service. Elders, tatua, those are community leaders. religious leaders in our case. They they can be they are significant influencers. And finally, those with an interest in the outcome of an effort. Some individuals and groups may not be affected by or involved in an effort, but they may nonetheless care about uh, they care about it. That they are willing to work to influence its outcome. Many of them have a following or a natural constituency. For example, business people, um, and they may therefore have a fair amount of clout or power. Those with an interest, or maybe with an interest in the outcome of an effort, businessmen, business people, or the business community. The business community usually will recognize its interest in any effort that will provide it with more, that will provide them with more and better workers, or any effort that makes it easier and more likely for them to make a profit. Um, and by the same token, it's likely to oppose efforts that it sees as costing money or imposing regulations on it. Just recently, the Brisbane City Council have scrapped 50 car parking spaces in the CBD, in the Brisbane CBD, and in that place, they've decided to build exclusive cycle lanes. Um, Businesses were not very happy with that. They argued that if people can't park in front of their business, their restaurant, cafe, or whatnot, then if people can't park it directly in front of them, then nobody's going to come in. That's how they argued. That's how they argued against the removal of 50 odd parking spaces. So that's an example of uh, businesses, or an example of those with an interest in the outcome of an effort. Advocates. They may be active on either or both sides of the issue you're concerned with. Community activists are part of this red box group, those with an interest. Organizations and individuals who have a philosophical or political interest in the issue or population that an effort involves, or may organize to support the effort or to defeat it. Another example of this group uh, would be like me, for example, people with academic or research interested. Oh, sorry, people with academic or research interests related to a targeted issue or a targeted population. Um, their work may have convinced them of the need for an intervention or initiative. Or they may simply be sympathetic to the goals of the effort and understand them better than most. So, for example, if I were researching the correlation between public health and urban design, or public health and urban infrastructure. And then the Surabaya city government introduced an initiative, or introduced a program to get more people out of their cars and onto walking, and or onto taking non-motorized forms of transport, for example. Then I may take an interest in that initiative because I have a research going on at the moment that explores the correlation between public health and urban design, for example. Um, Other than those with academic or research interests, people with money or financiers or funders and potential financiers are obviously key stakeholders, in that in many cases, without their support, the effort wouldn't be possible. Um, and lastly, in the red box category, the community at large. When widespread community support is needed, then the community as a whole maybe key stakeholders. Now, regardless of the purpose of your effort, identifying stakeholders and their interests should be among the first. It should be top priority, um, among the first, if not the very first item in your agenda. It's it's generally the fairest course you can take, and the one that is most likely to keep your effort out of trouble. So you should identify your stakeholders if um, if you want to involve stakeholders in a participatory process. Obviously, 2 seconds. Now they should be part of every phase of the work, so that they can both contribute and take ownership, to give them a sense of belonging, a sense of ownership. Their knowledge of the community and understanding of its needs can provide can provide you with valuable, or can prove invaluable in helping you to avoid mistakes in your approach and in the people you choose to involve. If your intent, or if your activity or your program or your initiative is a sort of participatory action research project, then stakeholders should be included in any assessment and pre-planning activities, as well as planning and implementation stages. That way, they will understand the research process and the research project much more clearly, and they can add to them. Another example of this is, usually when I supervise a if I supervise an undergraduate when I supervise an undergraduate thesis, when the students are developing a questionnaire or a data collection tool, then I ask them to test the questionnaire, to test the tool, using a similar subject to their target audience. That way, they can identify or these test subjects or these pilot subjects can help the researchers or can help the students identify or anticipate any potential mistakes. For example, they can identify unclear wording. This question isn't clear. Can you rephrase that? Or this question may be a bit too sensitive to ask. Can you not include that question, or can you rephrase that in a way so that it doesn't appear too offensive, maybe that sort of thing. And by involving these pilot test subjects, they can they can understand the research process that's going on. They can understand your thought process, and again, that way they can contribute. They can contribute greatly um, in your action research. Um, Thirdly, if you want your process to be regarded as transparent, then stakeholder involvement from the beginning is necessary. Um, Now, any community will believe that the process is an open and transparent process if it is truly open. You should identify your stakeholders if your effort or initiative involves changes that will affect people in different ways. It's important that they be involved early so that that any concerns or any barriers can show up early and they can be addressed. Um, like I mentioned earlier about maneuvering away from obstacles and such. And lastly, you want to identify you certainly would like you certainly would want to identify your stakeholders um, if your project or your initiative is in situations where there are potentially legal implications, such as the building of a oh sorry, such as uh, such as developing a building plan or a development plan for a certain region, or perhaps even constructing a building can have legal implications. And involving stakeholders in projects or initiatives that may have legal implications. If you involve stakeholders from the beginning, it is both fair and it can help you stave off, or it can help you stay away from the possibility of lawsuits or class actions down the road. Um, in short, in most cases, the earlier in the process stakeholders can be involved, if you involve them as early as possible, then the better. So now you should you should already have a grasp of how significant it is to identify your stakeholders. And now, um, how do we identify them? Um, the first step in identifying and addressing stakeholder interest is, surprise, surprise, is identifying the stakeholders themselves. We've discussed in general terms the categories that stakeholders might fall into, but the list is different. The list is different for each community and each effort. It's an important part of your job as a planner to determine who all your stakeholders are and to try to involve them in a way that advances your goals. Once you've identified the stakeholders, the next task is to understand their interests. Some will have some sort of an investment in carrying the effort forward, but others may be equally intent on preventing it from happening, or making sure that your efforts are unsuccessful. Now, stakeholder analysis, which is also known as stakeholder mapping, will help you to decide which stakeholders might have the most influence over the success or failure of your effort, which might be your most important supporters, and which might be your most important opponents. Once you have that information, you can make plans for dealing with stakeholders with different interests and different levels of influence. Now, in identifying stakeholders, it is important to think beyond the obvious. Beneficiaries, policymakers, etc. They're easy to identify. Whereas indirect effects or secondary stakeholders, they're sometimes harder to see. Um, for example, a push for a new regulation, a push for new regulations on a particular industry, for instance, might entail greatly increased paperwork or the purchase of new machinery on the part of that industry suppliers. A most recent example is Brexit. With the UK's exit from the European Union, they have greatly increased burdens, especially administrative burdens, on exporters and any other industry that may have direct or indirect relationships with exports, with the exporting activity. Other examples, traffic restrictions to control speeding in residential neighborhoods may affect commuters that use public transportation. Try to think as many ways as possible that your effort might bring benefits or problems to people not directly in its path. That's one way to identify what do you call it, secondary stakeholders. Um, Given that there are a number of ways to identify stakeholders, often the use of more than one method will yield better results. So one way of identifying stakeholders is to brainstorm, get together with people in your organization, officials, and other people who are already involved in or informed about the effort, and start calling out categories and names. Part of the point of brainstorming is to come out with anything that comes to mind, even if it seems silly. On reflection, these silly ideas can turn out to be among the best. So be as far-ranging as you can, even if it sounds silly and far-fetched. Put it on paper. Take a note of it. Now, after 10, 15 minutes of brainstorming, you can stop and have a look at each suggestion. Perhaps identify each as a primary or secondary and or key stakeholders, and start sorting them out that way. You can also collect categories and names from informants in the community, if they're not available to be part of the brainstorming session. Informants can be particularly good or potentially significant. Informants are members of a population or residents of a geographic area of concern. If you want to develop something in Surabaya, then of course you have to get someone from that geographic area, and not someone from outside. So obviously. Another way is to consult with organizations that either are or have been involved in similar efforts, or that work with the population or in the area of concern. You can also get more ideas from your stakeholders as you identify them. So they may suggest you've identified a certain group of stakeholders, and then they may suggest, oh, those guys are also, those guys might also be interested. Why don't you go and talk to them? And you talk to them, and then they will point you to a different group and say, yeah, we're interested. Those guys might also be affected, and so on. So get more ideas from your stakeholders as you identify them, and if appropriate, you can also advertise. You can um, advertise to see who are interested in, or who may have interests in a certain project or a certain effort that you are doing. For example, you may be involved in the planning of a new bridge that may you may be involved in the planning of a new bridge that will require the modification of certain roads. The bridge requires a new on-off ramp. A new on-off ramp that will require land clearing, such and such and such. And so you may advertise the project. We're going to build a bridge, and this bridge is going to be affecting you, and you, who happen to live in this particular neighborhood. So if you're interested in having a say, come and talk to us. Advertise, and you can use a combination of the media, often free, through various community service arrangements, community meetings, community and organizational newsletters, social media, targeted emails, announcements by leaders at meetings, and even religious gatherings, and word of mouth to get the word out. So advertising is not exclusively getting an advertiser to broadcast it on telly or on radio, but you can also use community meetings and community organizations and such to get the news out. Through advertising, you may even find people who consider themselves stakeholders, whom you haven't even thought about. So you can use a combination of brainstormings and collecting from informants and consulting with organizations. So you can include a combination of many of these methods to identify stakeholders that are relevant to whatever initiative it is that you're doing. Right, you have your stakeholders now in your pocket. It's time to understand. It's time to discover and try to understand their interests, and see where these ideas that they carry with them and interests that they have with them come from. Now, as I've mentioned several times, stakeholder interests may vary. Some stakeholders' interests may be best served by carrying the effort forward. Others may have interests best served by stopping or weakening the effort. Even among stakeholders from the same group, there may be conflicting concerns. Some of the many ways that stakeholder interests may manifest themselves are potential beneficiaries may be wildly supportive of an effort, seeing it as an opportunity or the pathway to a better life, or they may be ambivalent or resentful towards it. The effort or intervention may be embarrassing to them. For example, if you're introducing a adult literacy program, to increase adult literacy or to improve adult literacy, certain adults may be embarrassed in coming out that they're not that literate, for example. Or maybe your effort just seems burdensome. it just creates more burden, for example, or people think that it creates more burden. But they may not understand it, or they may not see the benefit that will come from it. They may be afraid to try something new, or on the assumption that they'll fail or will end up worse off than they are. People may be distrustful of any people or organizations engaged in such an effort, and they may feel like they're being looked down upon. Some stakeholders may have economic concerns. Sometimes these concerns are merely selfish or greedy, as in the case of a corporation with billions in annual profits, unwilling to spend a small part of that money to stop its factories from polluting. But in most cases, economic considerations may be legitimate. A classic case of economic considerations is the conflict between open space and preservation, between open space preservation and the opportunity to the opportunity to sell land for development. Farmers and other rural residents often have no other asset but their land. If by selling it they can become instant millionaires and live comfortably in retirement after working hard for very little all their lives, then why should they be expected to pass up that opportunity in favor of open space preservation? Economic concerns can also work in favor of an effort. An initiative to build one or more community clinics can provide construction jobs, orders for medical equipment, jobs for medical professionals and paraprofessionals, and economic advantages for the community. It might be backed, therefore, by unions, equipment manufacturers, professional associations, and local governments, and largely for economic reasons. Business people may have concerns about such things as universal health care or regulation. While these may be good for the larger society, they may actually hurt some businesses, especially for very small businesses where a slight change in profits may mean not a drop in share price, but the inability to sustain one's livelihood. Now that's a big issue. Businesses may have economic concerns in the opposite direction as well. Violence prevention may bode well for businesses in areas that people are hesitant to frequent because of the threat of violence. And it might also reduce the risk of losses and physical harm to the business owners themselves, thus their positive interest in an effective violence prevention effort. Let's see. So secondly, mandates that do not directly affect various professionals may affect them indirectly. The jobs of police, teachers, therapists, medical personnel, and others can be changed by changes in the law, in laws, regulations, or policies. Increased or decreased emphasis on enforcement or treatment for drug-related offenses can place new obligations on police and others, even if they haven't been involved in deciding on the changes. Reporting requirements for child abuse and neglect, domestic violence, and other types of crimes may affect the work of teachers, doctors, nurses, therapists, and others. Family concerns may enter stakeholder interests as well. Parents in many places can now be reported for child abuse if applying punishments like spankings or like spankings with a brush or belt that their own parent may have used as a matter of course. without discussing the rights or wrongs of the issue. It's important to understand that some people will see this as protecting children, and others may see this as interfering with parental rights. And lastly, you don't have to, and in fact, you shouldn't try to guess what stakeholders' interests are. You should ask your stakeholders what's important to them. If there are stakeholders that aren't willing to be involved, try to talk to them anyway. If that isn't possible, if that's not possible, try to find out their concerns from others who are likely to know. Most stakeholders will be more than willing to tell you how they feel about a potential or an ongoing effort. They'll be more than willing to tell you what their concerns are, and what needs to be done or to change, or what needs to be changed to address those concerns. Finally, we go into the actual mapping themselves. So let's suppose then you've identified all your stakeholders and you understand each of their concerns. Now what? They all have to understand. They all have to understand what you want to do. You have to respond to their concerns in some way, at least by acknowledging them. Whether you can satisfy them or not. So, and you have to find a way to move forward with as much support from the stakeholders as you can gather, as you can muster. Stakeholder analysis or stakeholder mapping is a way of determining who among stakeholders can have the most positive or the most negative influence on an effort. Who's likely to be most affected by the effort, and how you should work with stakeholders of different levels of interest and influence. Most methods of stakeholder analysis or mapping divide stakeholders into one of four groups, each occupying one space in a four-space grid as shown. As you can see, low to high influence over the efforts run along a line from the bottom to the top of the grid. So this is the influence line, low influence, high influence, and low to high interest in the efforts run along a line from the left to right or horizontally. Now, both influence and interest can be either positive or negative, depending on the perspectives of the stakeholders in question. And the lines describing them are continuous, meaning that people can have any degree of interest from none to as high as possible, including any points in between. People may have zero interest, or people may have 100 interest. People we've described as key stakeholders would generally appear in the upper right quadrant. Now, that's because they have high influence and they have high interest in an effort. So the purpose of this diagram is to help you understand what kind of influence each stakeholder has on your organization and or the process and the potential success of your effort. Now, that knowledge in turn can help you manage, or can help you decide how to manage your stakeholders, or how to marshal the help of those that support you, how to involve those who could be helpful, and how to convert or at least neutralize those who may start out feeling negative. How can you convert low influence people to high influence, or sorry, how can you convert low interest to high interest, for example? or how can you neutralize people who have high influence that may impact your organization or that may impact the outcome of your effort negatively? An assumption that most proponents of this analysis technique seem to make is that the stakeholders most important to the success of your effort are in the upper right section of the grid, and those least important are in the lower left. So that's a general assumption that most people who use this technique adhere to. The names in the brackets or in the parentheses are another way to define the same stakeholder characteristics in terms of how they relate to the effort. Promoters have both great interest in the effort and the power to help to make it successful, or the power to help derail it. Defenders have a vested interest. They can voice their support in the community, but they have little actual power to influence the effort in any way. Latents have no particular interest or involvement in the effort, but they have the power to influence it greatly if they become interested. And then apathetics. They have they have little to no interest at all, and they have little to no power at all. And some of these people may not even know that the effort exists. Now, when we talk about interest here, it means one or both of two things. Um, First is that the individual or the organization or group is interested intellectually or philosophically in the effort, and or two, um, she is affected by it, or that the this group of people are affected by by the effort. At the level of interest, in this second sense, correspond to how great the effect is. If they're affected, then their interest may be greater if they are greatly affected by an effort. But if they're not that greatly affected by an effort, then their level of interest may be much lower. And then influence, right? Right. Where were we? Interest, influence now. Now, influence can be interpreted in several ways. An individual or group can wield official power in some way as a government official or agency, for example. As an administrator, a board member, or funder, an individual or group has some power over the organization conducting the effort. Another possibility is influence as a community leader, as a college president, a hospital CEO, clergy member, bank president, etc. They may have a certain influence. These people are often listened to as a result of their position in the community, and they may hold one or more actual or honorary positions that give them even more influence. Key stakeholders are often connected to large networks, and thus can both reach and sway many community members. Such connections can be through work, family, long generations, or years of residency, membership in many clubs or organizations, or they may have built the network or connections from former official status. Great influence can be exercised by people or occasionally organizations that are simply respected in their community for their intelligence, integrity, concern for others, and the common good and objectivity. Some people and some organizations, they exercise influence through economics or economic power. The largest employer in a community can exert or exercise considerable control over its workforce, for example, or even over the community as a whole, using a combination of sticks and carrots or threats and rewards. Now, influence and interest can be either internal or external to the organization or the community. Most of the descriptions I just mentioned pertain to external influence and interest, but they could also be internal as well. Organizations and institutions, as well as communities, have official and unofficial leaders, people in positions that confer power or influence, people with large networks, etc. And in addition, those who actually carry out the effort, usually staff people in an organization, can have a great deal of control over whether an effort is conducted as intended, and therefore over its effectiveness. Right, now, stakeholder analysis is only useful if it is used. Stakeholder management is where analysis and practice meet. It allows you to use the analysis to help gain support and buy-in for your effort. Now, a big question here is whether the whole concept of stakeholder management is in fact directly opposed to the idea of participatory process, where everyone has a voice. In practice, we all try to manage people constantly, from attempting to convince a skeptical 3-year-old that broccoli tastes good, to motivating students and employees to do their best. We are all manipulative little buggers, aren't we? If management turns into manipulation without any respect for the other person or organization involved, it's definitely not in the spirit of participation. Persuasion, negotiation, education, and other methods of managing stakeholders that acknowledge their concerns, however, do. They do not violate that spirit, the spirit of participation. And persuasion, negotiation, and education are often a necessary part of making a participatory process work. Now, a little bit further on stakeholder management. Now, the first step in stakeholder management is to understand clearly where each stakeholder lies in the grid. Someone that has both a major interest in and a considerable power over the organization and or the effort. A funder, for example, or a leader of a population of concern would go in the upper right-hand corner of the upper right quadrant. Stakeholders with neither power nor interest would go in the lower left-hand corner of the lower left quadrant. Those with a reasonable amount of power and interest would go in the middle of the upper right quadrant, etc. Eventually, the grid will be filled in with the names of stakeholders occupying various places in each quadrant, corresponding to the level of power and interest. Now, the next step is to decide who needs the most attention. Now, in general, the business people who use this model would say that you should expend most of your energy on the people who can be most helpful. For example, those with the most power. Powerful people with the highest interest are indeed the most important, followed by those with power and less interest. Those in the lower right quadrant, high interest low influence or low power, they come next. With those low interest and low power coming last. Another way to look at stakeholder management, and do remember that all the people and groups we're talking about here are stakeholders, those who can affect and are affected by the effort in question, is that the most important stakeholders are those most dramatically affected. Some of those, at least before the effort begins, maybe in the lower left quadrant of the grid, they may be too involved in trying to survive, either financially or physically, from day to day, to think about an effort to change their situation. Um, in short, your stakeholder management depends on what your purpose is in involving stakeholders. If your purpose is to marshal or to gather support for the effort or policy change, then each quadrant of the grid calls for one kind of attention. If your purpose is primarily participatory, then each quadrant calls for another kind of attention. For example, stakeholder management for marshalling support for an effort. In short, you should focus your efforts of managing the stakeholders in the upper quadrants. The high influence, high interest folks are the most important here. They're the ones who can really make the effort go, and they care about and are invested in the issue. If they're positive, they need to be cultivated and involved. You should find roles and jobs for them, not just tasks that they'll enjoy and that can contribute substantively to the effort, so that they can feel responsible for part of what's going on. Pay attention to these people's needs, pay attention to their opinions, and accede to them where it's appropriate. If their ideas aren't acted on, make sure they know why. If they have an idea and you decide not to follow through with it, make sure they know why, and suggest an alternative and reason with them why the alternative seems like the better course. As much as possible, make the people in this particular quadrant an integral part or integral parts of the development team or the project team. Now, when the people who could be promoters are negative, they have a negative attitude towards you and your organization and your effort, the major task is to convert them. If you can't, they will become the most powerful opponents of your effort, and that could make it impossible for you to succeed. So they need to be treated as potential allies, and their concerns should be addressed to the extent possible. They should be addressed as possible without compromising the effort. If you look at the latents, high influence, low interest people, these are people and organizations largely unaffected by the effort that could be potentially extremely helpful if they could be convinced that the effort is important, either to their own self-interest or to the greater good. You have to approach and inform them, and to keep contact with them over time. Excuse me for a minute, boys. Can you help? It's okay. Just help her out, please. Help her out. Help her out. Sorry. Sorry about that. Where was I? High influence, low interest people. You have to approach them, you have to keep them informed, you have to keep in touch with them over time, offer them opportunities to to weigh in on issues, to give their opinion or their thoughts of an issue relating to the effort, demonstrate to them how the effort will have a positive effect on issues and populations they're concerned with. If you can shift them over to the promoter category, if you can convert them somehow to the promoter category, then you've you've definitely gained valuable allies. Once again, there's a possibility that these guys here can be negative and oppositional. If that's the case, it might be best not to stir a sleeping dragon if they're not particularly affected or affected by, or they're not particularly concerned about the effort. Even if they disapprove of it, the chances are that they'll simply leave it alone. They'll leave you alone, and it might be best. It might be best that way. If they begin to voice their opposition, then your first attempt might be at conversion or neutralization rather than battle. You don't want to fight them, but you would ideally you don't want to fight them, but if you can convert them from being negative to having a positive attitude towards you or your effort. If that doesn't work, then you just have to fight it out somehow. Defenders, low interest. Low influence, high interest people. Now, since these people and organizations can't help you much, you can simply keep them informed and not worry too much about them. Not worry too much about involving them any further. In health and community building, however, they can often provide the volunteer time and skills that an effort, particularly an advocacy initiative, needs to survive. These are often the foot soldiers who stuff envelopes, who make phone calls, and otherwise make an initiative possible. They're also often among those most affected by an effort, and thus have a good reason to work hard for, or work hard against it, depending on how that impacts or affects them. Lastly, the purple people, or the apathetics, those with low key and low interest and low influence. Now, those in this category simply don't care about your effort one way or the other. They may be stakeholders only through their membership in a group or their position in the community. Their effort may, in fact, have little or no impact at all on your effort. Sorry, your effort may have very little or no impact to them at all. As a result, you can just leave them alone. They need little to no management at all. Keep them informed every now and then, sporadically, by newsletter or similar device. But still treat them with respect. Don't offend them. Don't bother them, and they won't bother you, or they won't get in your way. However, stakeholder management for developing a participatory process or including marginalized populations is entirely different. If previously I say focus your efforts on the upper quadrants, then if you want to manage stakeholders for a participatory process, focus your efforts on the lower quadrants. So if your purpose is primarily to create a participatory process, you'll try to create an effort that takes all perspectives into consideration. You will hash out the differences and make participants the owner of your effort. Sorry. Stakeholder management in that situation means trying to attract representatives of all stakeholders and treating them all as equals or colleagues. while at the same time leveling the field as much as possible by providing training and support to those who need it. Now, the 4-cell grid is still useful here, but the attention given to those in each quadrant will be different from that in the other model, the one marshalling support model. Here, the largest amount of attention may go to the people in the 2 lower quadrants, since those with little power often have less experience in such areas as meeting and planning, and they have less confidence in their ability to engage in them. They'll definitely need information about what they're being invited to do, and they might need training, mentoring, and other support measures in doing it. But you know what? A successful participatory process may require that the people in the upper right quadrant, these guys, understand and buy into the process fully. They can help to bring stakeholders in the other positions on board and to encourage them to participate in planning, implementing, and evaluating the effort. That means working with the promoters to explain the concept of participation fully and to convince them that pulling all stakeholders in is the best way to accomplish your and their goals. They might also serve as mentors or partners to those who are not used to having seats at the table. Now, obviously, not one thing that I need to clear is that not all stakeholders in the lower 2 quadrants are low income, unused to managing things, or lacking in education, or lacking in organizational skills whatsoever. They may be high income, they may be highly educated, but since they don't see themselves as affected by the effort, they just simply don't care, for example. Others may have no influence in this particular situation, though they may have a great deal in other circumstances. Very often, however, those who do lack skills and experience find themselves in those 2 lower corners or those 2 lower quadrants. When that's the case, they may need training and other support in order to participate fully. Now, that may be one aspect of stakeholder management, and it may help to move them into positions of more influence and teach them how to exercise it. Important message: the task of converting the negative or skeptical still exists in this situation, as does the need to create interest among the latents, these guys. Those stakeholders who could be helpful but doesn't have a strong investment in the effort. Often the stories of those who have or will benefit from the effort can be effective motivators for people who might otherwise be indifferent. Such stories are particularly powerful if the listeners know the people involved but never suspected the difficulties they will face. If the latents become involved, their influence can help to greatly strengthen the effort. The more people, groups, institutions, and organizations with influence that are involved, the greater the chances for success. The task with latents is to convince them that they are true stakeholders and that the effort will benefit them either directly or indirectly. If it's not direct, the benefit in question may be as removed from them as increasing the community's tax base by making more people employable, for example, or creating a more just community by, let's say, eliminating discrimination. Look at the time. I hope we still have time for the simulation. I'll just blitz through these. These next few slides. So, bringing people and organizations into the process and moving them toward the upper right quadrant of the stakeholder grid generally demands that you keep them involved and informed by treating them with respect, providing whatever information or training that they need, finding tasks or jobs or for them to be so that they can harness their interests, to capture their talents and interests, maintain their enthusiasm with praise, celebration, small tokens of appreciation, and continual reminders of the effort's accomplishments. Engage them in decision making, of course, employing them in the conception, planning, implementation, and evaluation of the effort from the very beginning. And in case of those who start with little, in the case of those who start with little power or little influence, helping them learn how to gain and exercise influence by working together, and developing their personal critical thinking and even political skills. As with anything else you do, it's important to monitor and continuously evaluate how well stakeholders have been identified, understood, and involved in the course or throughout the course of your effort. It's obviously best to involve stakeholders from the very beginning, but it's never too late to learn from what you've done so you can improve your work. Evaluation of the stakeholder process should be an integral part of the overall evaluation of the effort, and stakeholders themselves should be involved in developing that evaluation. They can best tell you what you what did and didn't work to pull them in and keep them engaged. Now, on the slides, there are 6 evaluation questions that you might consider to incorporate in your evaluation toolbox. Now, this brings me This brings us to the final piece of working with stakeholders. Keep stakeholders involved. Now, as with any other community building activity, you have to keep it at indefinitely, or you have to keep at it. You have to keep at it. You have to continuously work on it indefinitely, or at least as long as the effort goes on. New stakeholders may pop up, and they may need to be brought in as time goes on. Old stakeholders may cease to be actual stakeholders, but they may retain a certain interest in the effort and may therefore continue to be included. You have to maintain stakeholders' and supporters' motivation, of course, keep them informed, and or continue to find meaningful work for them to do if you want to keep them involved and active. And finally, understanding and engaging stakeholders can be tremendously helpful to your effort, but only if it results in their ownership of it and their long-term commitment to it. And that depends, and that really depends on your continuing attention and how you manage these and how you manage your stakeholders. 2 seconds. All right. Now, it's time to play a game. So, in this simulation, we're going to. If you have the brief, you have an idea of what the case study is. It has something to do with windmills, wind farms, onshore wind farms to be precise. And what I'll do is I'll split the class. There are 19 of you. I'll split the class into 3 groups of 6. One group may have 7 members. That is, so 6, 6, and 7. And the topic is, of course, the onshore wind farm development plan. I was planning for a 70-minute duration, 40 minutes discussion, and then 30 minutes presentation. I'm not sure if we can achieve that, but let's let's just focus on the discussion bit, on the discussion bit for the time being. And if if we can, then if we do have then some time, then we may present group results of 10 minutes per group. Or if we don't have time for all three groups to present, then we can just maybe have one group present, and then all of you can submit a pre-recorded presentation in classroom, for example. So I'll just stop sharing for a moment, and let's see, where's the oh, with regards to breakout rooms. Unfortunately, I I won't be able to record all. I won't be able to record all the discussions that's going on in each breakout room. So I may have to ask you or a representative from each group. I'm going to place you all in. I'm going to place you all in breakout rooms randomly. I'm going to have to kindly ask you, or one of you from each group, to record your discussion session, and it's up to you. If you want to record it on your computer, you can do so, or if you want to record it into the cloud, then you can do so as well. Otherwise, if that's too much, then that's fine. We don't we might not need You might not need to record it at all. So I'll make a. I have already three breakout rooms. I'll open all the rooms. Before we move into the breakout rooms, um, does anybody have any question regarding regarding the discussion points that we just talked about, or any questions about this particular activity? Okay. I'll take that silence as yeah, we got we got your brief. We've read it and we're excited to get it on the way. Cool. So I'll open all the breakout rooms now, and then I'll hop from one room to another, just to make sure how you guys are doing. So actually, before we go in, I mentioned in the meeting brief that we'll be using Google Jamboard. You don't have to use Google Jamboard if you don't want to. You can do your brainstorming on a PowerPoint slide or a Google slide document. It's entirely up to you. I just thought normally we would do this on a flip chart, and to replace that flip chart, I use a Google Jamboard. But you can use something else other than the boards that I provided in the exercise brief. So let's start opening the rooms now. Oh, do I have to? Oh, hang on. Do I have to assign? I have to assign every. I have to assign. No. Let's close all the rooms. Delete the rooms. Delete. No. Boy. There we go. So I'll assign you all to a random breakout room now. Please accept the invitation to join the breakout rooms. Thank you very much. I still see there are some people in the still some people that haven't joined their breakout rooms. Okay, good. I hope you had a I hope you all had a fruitful discussion. Now, um, I think we still have a little bit of time, I reckon, for a brief presentation from each group. So, if anyone would like to start to share their findings, you're more than welcome to do so. Any volunteers? Just a reminder that what you can present anything that you find or anything that you can come up with in the short period of time of discussion. You will have time to finalize your presentations, refine your presentations um, before submitting to classroom. So if you would like to present now, I'm not going to ask you to prepare a pre-recorded presentation to upload to Classroom. You can just upload the slides. So yeah, it's really up to you.
So we are from Group T, and we have done dividing the stakeholders based on the 4 quadrants: the promoters, latents, defenders, and apathetics. The first stakeholder is the onshore wind industry. We think they have the high interest because they will be the one that make the technology, the wind farms itself, and then they also will have the high influence to make a say in the stakeholder meetings. And also the second one is the land managers. The land managers have high influence because they're the one that have the land, and they also have high interest because probably they are the one that will sell or not sell the land to the government. The third one is the energy supplier and grid operator, PLN, because PLN is the one and only company that run the electricity in Indonesia. So they probably the one that will manage the whole wind farm. The fourth one is the political decision makers, because they will have a say on the decision whether they will approve or not. That's it for the promoters. And then to the latents one, the community councils. In our group opinion, the first one is the community councils, because community council is the one that have the last say, like if they agree or not to the decision. And also the financiers, because they will help to finance the whole operation or project. But the financier doesn't really have high interest to the project. And then we go to the defenders, the citizens, local resident. I think the citizens and local resident has low influence, but they have high interest to oppose or agree with the project, because in the scenario, the wind farm will affect the health of the people. And then the second one is in the NGOs. We assume that the NGOs is disagreeing, like the environmentalist NGOs. They have a lot to say to oppose, but we still think that they still has a low influence but high interest. And also the housing associations, maybe the housing associations can also oppose, like if the wind farm is too close to the housing and settlements. And that's it for the defenders. And then the fourth one is the apathetics, the one that has low interest and low influences, like the local businesses and the local chamber of commerce. We haven't finished the agree or disagree yet, because I think because we just assume that who will be agreeing is the onshore wind industry and then the energy supplier, because they will have the project to their hand. And then the disagree is the citizens. We assume all the citizens or most of the citizens will disagree, and also the NGOs and the housing associations. We still haven't finished our ranks influence yet, but the latest discussion is that we have decided the political decision makers, community councils, and financier is the top 3 of the ranks in influence. And then in the attitude, probably the citizens, because they will affected the most by the project. And then, yeah, I think that's it for our discussion, sir.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. Of course, it was a very brief very brief discussion session, and this is perhaps a relatively new tool for you guys to play with, so and familiarize yourself with. But I think what you've done so far is pretty awesome. You already you can already guess who who will potentially agree with the project. I for one thought that the National Electric Company might oppose the idea of them having a competition as the energy supplier. Um, but as you mentioned, that they will manage distribution and so on. So yeah, thank you for that. That's a very interesting take. Those who might disagree, the citizens for whatever reason, social groups and housing associations. Now, I realize that you haven't had the chance to come up with a strategy or so to manage the stakeholders. That's fine. You still have a couple of days to finalize this, and just make a short summary of the activity, and present the stakeholder maps more, or finalize the stakeholder maps to make it more representative. But thank you, Group 3, for your very insightful presentation. Thank you for volunteering.
Sir, I would like to ask something, sir.
Sure.
In the presentations before, you mentioned that about key stakeholders. What I want to ask is, does the key stakeholders included in this is also included in the quadrants or no, sir?
Okay. Key stakeholders vary differently from project to project. Um, in some cases, they might, in some cases, they might be, in some cases, they might be here. Um, in other cases, they might be down there. So it's really all very flexible. You can, if you want to, you can identify key stakeholders in this particular case study or in this particular exercise. Um, but I think uh, indirectly, you have begun to do so. You've already begun to identify the key stakeholders by um, guessing who agrees and who might disagree, and you're already ranking you're already ranking the the stakeholders according to their influence and your predicted attitude. So I think you guys are on the right track so far.
Okay, sir. Thank you for the answers.
No worries. So, who would like to go next?
I think group one wants to go, sir.
Sweet. So, um,
Um, so good evening, everyone. We are from group one, and this is the draft of stakeholder mapping that we discussed. So we didn't really do much research for the mapping of the stakeholders. So we only used the what logic we have on this specific study case. So I think I'm going to start with the promoters. So obviously the first one we have the wind industry. Why we put them in the high influence is because well they're the one who is very specialized in the field, and I think we also put them in the high interest because they have a potential to gain profit from this project. So I'm taking into account their economic perspective also, which is why we are putting them in promoters. And then next we have citizen. So we put citizen in the promoters group solely because we agreed on doing community participation in this project. So which is why we put them in the high interest and also the high influence because we want to contribute the citizens in the process of the project. And the rest is basically kind of the same with the previous group. The land manager is the one who will supply the land for our projects, and they might gain profit from this project, which is why we put them in the promoters. Uh, and then we have the energy supplier, also the promoters, and I think we also agree that are they agree with the project because they might gain more how do I say it? More cabang in this wind farm, and also the financiers because well we will need the finance to do this project. We put them in a high influence and high interest position, and then in the latents group, we we definitely recognize the high influence that political decision makers have in this case, but we put them in a low interest because we see them as this higher power. And I think they will only need to make decisions, sort of like in the end of the project. So when everything is settled, we can propose to them the projects that we will do, and then they will decide whether or not they agree with what we've come up with. So, which is why we put them in a low interest and in the later group. And I think the same goes with the local chamber. And then we have the defenders. So I feel like we put community councils in the defenders part because a lot of the community participation will be represented by the citizens. So we put them as a low interest but have a high influence. Yeah, I think the screen share is gone.
Sorry for that. Wait.
Cool. Okay, so the next one is NGO. So we put NGO in the defenders because we couldn't really specify which NGO would want to participate. We couldn't come up with some NGOs that would want to take part in. So as of now, we put them as a defender because they might be interested because the wind farm is a very clean, sort of a clean energy resource. And for the housing association, it's kind of the same with the community councils in that they are highly represented in the citizen. And in my vision, they would partake in the project when we want to localize them in the future after the wind farm is already established in a macro scale. And then the last part is the local businesses. I feel like if the citizen is already represented as a group of their own, local businesses specifically don't necessarily have an effect in this project. So that's why we put them as apathetic. And yeah, that's about what we have discussed in the short time that we have to discuss this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm just interested. Have you added or replaced stakeholders from the given list, or did you leave it as is?
What do you mean, sir?
There's a in the exercise brief. There were 11 stakeholders that you could add to or subtract from. So I was just wondering whether you did any of that, or did you leave it like just the 11 stakeholders as is?
Yeah, we took all the stakeholders and we put them in a group based on the mapping that you gave us.
Okay, that's fine. Well, thank you very much. That leaves us with one remaining group. We still have a little bit of time to find out what they've done so far. But to the last group, to the final group, the time and screen is yours.
We are still needing our presentation. Just a second.
No, that's fine. It doesn't have to be finalized or neat in any way. You know, it was a very short brainstorming session. So yeah, but thank you for that.
We are from room 2, and so sorry. I know this is like the coret-coret. We still didn't arrange this, but this is our idea for the first. We thought that the political decision makers and the community councils is related, and they are contributed in political policy. and onshore wind industry, and PLN is related to the energy provider sector, and the local businesses, local chamber of commerce is related, since the local business is or organized in the local chamber of commerce, because we have found that local chambers of commerce is an organization that provides the networking of the local businessmen. And the local chamber of commerce also related to the financiers, because they need a budget. And we concluded that three of them is contributed in economic sector, and land managers, housing associations also related in residential management about the settlement area, and lastly the citizens and NGOs is related in the welfare of community, because the NGOs usually supports citizens' voices through their campaign and activities. And after that, we are ranking these general categories, and this is not the final ranking yet. And Davin, please next frame. Yang kedua dulu, Pin. And this is our temporary diagram, and we have decided that the political decision makers and community councils as the promoters, because they have high influence and high interest. And next frame. And this is our agree and disagree for political decision make for the political policy, energy provider, and economic sector. We agree that it contributed on the final decision making, and we a little bit disagree about the welfare of community and residential management, but this is still on progress and could change. Next. And that's it from us.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And yeah, I think all of you have you got the gist of what the simulation was about. I hope that activity was as informative for you as it was fun for me to put together. Well, thank you very much, and congratulations to all of you for what you have achieved in such a short time. So now, just before we end our meeting this week, you have a couple of days. You have until Friday evening to finalize your stakeholder map, and to come up with a rough strategy, or rough stakeholder management strategy. Who to inform, who to really pay attention to, and who to completely ignore, that sort of thing. So yeah, it doesn't have to be a full-blown report. It could be just a few pages, a few pages summary, maybe 2-3 pages, just 2-3 pages long. Keep it really brief. But as long as it encapsulates, or as long as it described how, or as long as it contains your map, and how and the reason and your explanation as to why a certain stakeholder belongs, or you put a certain stakeholder in that particular position, and so on. There are some similarities between the three groups that I see. That's okay. There are some subtle differences there as well, and that's just as I had expected. So, right. So thank you again, and give yourselves a well-deserved pat on your back for today's activity. Thank you for participating in today's activity. Thank you for attending today's session. It was, hang on. So just to come back to this. So yeah, we've done this now, and to end our meeting today, if any of you haven't scanned the QR code or haven't punched in the class attendance code, you may do so now, 755929. I will also double check in the classroom of your attendance and your participation in the class. So once again, thank you very much for the awesome job that you guys have done, and I look forward to receiving your submissions on Friday evening, and I will see you all tomorrow morning for the site planning unit. So have a great afternoon. Have a great evening. Yes. Do you have?
Sorry, just a quick one. I'm asking for clarity based on the submission that we need to do it on Friday. So does that mean that we need? Is it mandatory that we need to like subtract some certain stakeholders from that list, or how?
No. You can add or subtract stakeholders from the list of 11 that I gave you. If you decide to stick with the 11 stakeholders that I gave you, that's fine. It's not a mandatory. It's not a mandatory thing. You don't have to add and or subtract stakeholders from the list.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
No worries. So. Any other last minute questions or comments? Alrighty then. Well, thanks again. Have yourselves a wonderful evening, and I'll see you tomorrow for the site planning unit, and I'll see you next week for the social mapping and network analysis session for community development. Hopefully we'll be able to do a similar simulation, and perhaps provide a longer time for this discussion rather than an extended period of me babbling away like I did today. So. Well, thanks again, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.